What's going on, family and friends? When I get on another nuance today, society. So basically, I've been contemplating since the last few videos about what the point is to most of the stuff we see today, as well as where we're headed and the silent tactics we see going on, you know, with coercion and whatnot, and how we operate with amongst one another, what gives us drive. And you know, you see opinions bubbling around. For the most part, we're differentiating between one another, and it does cause division, but we're needing to differentiate so we at least know, like, what is the best way to operate in this society, right? Because nobody's gonna tell you one way or the other. It's just, what have you seen is most beneficial to you, and what seems like most people attribute themselves to out of ease or out of comfort. Like, what is the normal way to operate in these societies, right? Now, when we divide, we have to think about what is the division based on. And since we understand that conversation maintains hate at the base, or sadism at the base, right? And then people become sadistic as a result, subconsciously. It's not something you actively look for, but you find enjoyment through that because other people find it humorous, and because you have a drive to want to relate or to be a part of something or validate yourself through other people, you end up attributing yourself to the same traits. So sadism subconsciously adopts to most minds. And so as a result, hatred is breeded, right? Hatred is fermented. It's something that's enabled and something we further. So the idea is that we should understand what this does to people, what it does to our minds, what it does to our drives to want to have purpose, what it does to our collective idea of cohesion when it comes to acting as one. Since countries are made to act as one, if you think about what a society means in general, or what a country means in general, a society is basically a collection of individuals who have come to agreement on how they want to live in a society, right? Not necessarily completely one way, but enough to coexist and stick around one another, right? So here in the US, that's the melting pot idea. So different cultures, traditions, religions, all coming in one and deciding how we want to operate as far as that. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything conclusive. And that's not the case anyway. I mean, there are many religions that reside in the US. You see Buddhism, you see Islam, you see Christianity, you see Catholicism, you see many things, okay? So there's no one way to think, one way to live. There are just many different cultures and traditions in this society coexisting at the same time. But the problem comes in the idea that belief in this way enables people to feel as if they need to prove theirs over another. And that builds comparison, it builds competitive nature, it builds the idea that somebody needs to be conquered or somebody needs to win what is presented. This is kind of why I believe the US has decided to create this game culture, right? Where we're not necessarily speaking to the idea, it's there. It's more of something you figure out through assumption, and then discovery through discovering things for yourself. So you learn about different tactics and whatnot, and you learn about the systemic way that things operate here. So capitalism, or whatever other systems we've used in the past, socialism, whatever. So as a result of this, you get a range of ideas that decide the game culture is inherent to human nature. Now, this doesn't have to be true. I personally do not believe we have to play games. We don't necessarily have to do things in a way that tell us we need to be better than one another or be better than another country or another society or another way of thinking. You just want to have a base format that allows for everybody to be autonomous in a way that is beneficial, not only for themselves, but for the society and also for the planet if possible. Because we want to maintain this planet. This is the only place we have to live. We don't necessarily have other planets out there. I mean, sure, we speculate Mars, we speculate other planets, but we don't have a legitimate living style in those planets. So we have to maintain Earth, right? And that's just how that works with people, because that's where we are. We live on planet Earth. So as a result of this, we have the idea that the division is based on ways of living. So because of the competitive nature and the comparisons and, you know, mechanisms that enable that, which happens to be classism, racism, authoritarianism, and the need for control that you see with a lot of people. This idea enables the game culture, the comparative model that we see within society when it comes to people. And then this enables the division. So the division, where does that lead us? Where does the mindset of different people lead us to thinking when it comes to divisiveness and other people? Okay, so division. At the base of it, we have racism. I'm sure we all know this, but we decide the classes based on not only race, but wealth is more attributed to racism than anything else. So, you know, here in America, this is our elite class, which I don't like to use the word of, but how it's going to represent what the top apparently looks like. So based on wealth, race here starts with whites, and then it goes down from there, and it's based on traditions, cultures, skin color, and then ultimately ideology. So it starts with white at the top, which is seen as the most beneficial for wealth, or the most prone to having wealth, just because of our history. We've had slavery systems built into this U.S. system, and we've seen that in the past before the U.S. And other societies as well, and many have fallen as a result, which we should be taking note of. But unfortunately, you can't change the minds of those who have a specific control over the system that we don't necessarily have an agency to fix or change ourselves. So we have whites at the top. Below that or under that, you could say is Asian, or you could say European. You could also say other races outside of white specifically, and that's kind of a hard race to decide based on skin color, because, you know, if you know anything about how skin color is formulated, it's based on where you've lived and your parents and your genetics. But basically, however far from the equator you've lived decides what your skin color is likely to be, as well as who your parents are and their grandparents and whatnot. But anyway, skin color is more based on where you've lived and your genes, rather than the race displayed on you, right? The tag, the title. So whites at the top, Asians, Europeans. Then under this we have likely Latino, right? I'm basically just going off shades here, because I don't know how else it's decided. It's a subconscious thing. It really has no base in reality. It's just, what do they see as most attributable to white skin color in general? Just the lighter shade, the paler shade, and then it goes down from there to black people, right? So however you want to define that, you could say Indian is next, you could say whatever, right? Because it's not based on logic anyway. But that's the base format to the division. So then after this, it bottles down to how we think or how we operate or what is the most attractive way of influence in this society. So because of hateful programming basically entrenched into our conversation system, you could say that the most beneficial way to operate is to be hateful yourself. And that does come with a lot of drawbacks, but they're not shown to you immediately because the way the US is created is in a way that allows you not to witness that immediately. Instead, it's more glistened over with royalties or with luxuries, right? So things like vehicles, houses, companionship, or to be around people who validate your hateful opinion is what makes it not look so bad, right? And there are so many people like this. And it's just, it's starting to become seen as a normal way of living because it's been embedded for so long. So now it's like many people assume that that's just normalcy or that's always been the way that humans operate. But the reality is, it is the opposite to normal living in general. And we've had to discover this over a couple of years in general, but we understand that it's not something that we thought was normal to begin with. So when you consider that and you consider that maybe there's other ways to operate, then you can see how division becomes the base format to operation in this society. And we don't understand that because most people don't want to witness truth much, right? And this is also programmed. We don't really want to see how truth operates. We don't want to see what reality really is, just because there are benefits to not seeing it. And it's also shamed upon by trying to do so. So this makes the hateful operation or the hateful living format seen as or seem like the most beneficial immediately. And you know, because humans like to have ease and don't want to work so much or be overworked for things that they don't necessarily have to. You want to be able to operate in society at your best potential, but with that sense of ease. So comfort is sold to you so that way you adopt the ideology that it's better to be hateful and it's better to be against your nature. And you don't know that because you're programmed not to see it. And then you don't want to see beyond that because truth is shamed and it's easier to just avoid it. And that's how it gets baked into the programming to the point you don't even tell that there's a difference at all. It just looks normal. And people just, you know, they don't second guess. They just assume this is what we do. This is how it's always been. This is what history has shown. We don't have to change. So obviously this is not correct, okay? Because change, it's always present. It's ever going. It doesn't stop. So change in the modern day was supposed to be in a way that advocates against scarcity and more prone to abundance, but not abundance for a specific, but for everyone, because the planet has enough for everybody. There is no need to hide away or hoard things because there's always going to be more to get. The resources from this earth can be remade, can be recycled, and can be used over and over and over again by the same people and different areas everywhere. So it's better to just advocate for abundance anyway, just because that's the normal way to operate. Now, we've understood this for the most part, but because of the ease given to you to do the opposite and the comfort that you are enabled for that, and the fact that many people assume that it's normal to do the opposite anyway, then you breed the format that begins to enable that naturally in the opposite system. And that is the idea of the hateful coward or the miserable coward, right? And you know anything about that, misery loves company. It loves to have somebody else validate that opinion or validate that stance, because it seems like it's better to, instead of think otherwise, it's better to find others to validate that opinion. And this is what's happened over the years. We've witnessed countless societies before the US do the same thing. They want to learn something, right? Everybody has that innate drive to want to learn, just because more knowledge makes you a better person, and it makes you more susceptible to growing, or more susceptible to having more things allotted to you. So the ease is more enabled. But because learning is also shamed upon, in not directly but indirectly, higher intelligence and awareness of what's going on is shamed, because those things are aligned with truth, which is shamed. Which means that it's better, without looking, to just not look anyway, to just decide operating as it is better. So the hateful coward becomes the base format over time. Now, what is the hateful coward? This is somebody, or a kind of person, who instead of regulates their own nervous system for positive traits like love, compassion, empathy, and righteousness, instead of those traits, they do the opposite. And it breeds a sense of self-hatred that becomes normalized, because you can validate that opinion and that stance through other people who have done the same thing. And because this so happens to be embedded, so we see authority figures who do the same lifestyle, who have control over the system. We see parents do this. We see politicians. We see outspoken voices, or people who seem like they speak with reason, or the need to decide things that enable progression in the society, whether that be negative or positive. These people are likely to have that hateful coward ideology embedded in their system, just because other people have, and they find community in them, which enables the validation of those opinions. So this basically means that the hateful coward is seen as the easy way, which is not good, because that means that the easy way is to go against your nature. Now, if you know anything about hating yourself, it's like a self-decomposing prophecy. You hate yourself in ways that deregulate you and regress you mentally. But you don't see that as an issue, because it's made to look like it's not regressive, but more prone to happiness, because others validate it and they seem happy while they regress or decompose, right? So things like drugs, things like addictions, things like projection and envy and gaslighting and manipulative tactics and exploitation, these things look normal because other people normalize them, and they find community and they validate each other. And that is what basically is the base format to the hateful coward. Anything against human nature that enables specific desires that people probably have wanted to do, but because you can't necessarily do that to another human without them likely rebelling against you or having some form of resentment for you doing that, it's better to just not say you're doing that and have other people help you do it and validate those opinions, while keeping those you're doing it to in the dark, right? And this is how exploitation is bred and enabled. So these hateful cowards, they find community, they live amongst each other. And then when you think about technology coming into the picture, social media, and then, you know, developments like the telephone and the internet, now you have an easier way for them to find community. And then they knock heads together. They find different ways to enable that lifestyle, because they validate one another. They don't necessarily listen to truth, because obviously it's shamed, probably by them to begin with. And then this enables that as the base format, because it has infected leadership to begin with. It has infected past leaderships and past societal systems. So this is not something that the US is new to, right? This has been brought over from years and years of different societies that have fallen as a result of this. So the idea should have been to come to understanding that is going to go against our nature to the point of decomposition and destruction, just because that's the path. If you've looked at the past history, which is a good reason as to why we record history, so we can learn from our mistakes, which is another human trait you shouldn't go against, because that's learning, and that's the best kind too. But because we don't allow ourselves to try to understand that, and instead go for those easy routes, which is the hateful coward route, then you build community, and your leadership tells you that it's okay. So if you are not smart enough or intelligent enough to know right from wrong in that aspect, and then you have somebody you see as a leader because they've purposed themselves as that, and they've placed themselves in a way to control your way of finding knowledge, to know better. If you don't know better, then you tell yourself, I'll just listen to this leader because they're a leader. Obviously, they have a way of living that enables their lifestyle. So if I do it, there should be no problem. And that's how you build this huge, ginormous mob thing, or mob mentality of hateful cowards. And so if you want to really get down to the nitty-gritty of what this likely has turned into, if you ask me, this is where gang stalking came from, or stalking in general. And this is where the idea that there are two different ways to operate, and that both can coexist. But the idea that that's even reasonable is not reasonable. If you really think about it, to be exploitative and to make that your base living format, you need somebody to exploit. You can't necessarily exploit another hateful coward because they're not building knowledge. They're not building truth. They're not building anything. So there is no structure to take from. You need structure from people who oppose this, which means that the hateful coward understands that it is necessary to do the opposite of what they're doing, but they choose not to because they don't understand that not everybody can be a hateful coward. They believe that if not this, then something is wrong. But if we all became hateful cowards, we would cannibalize our system because there is nothing external to extract from while being validated by other hateful cowards. So if we reach the point of 100% hateful cowards, and we decided that that's the normal way to live, and try to force one another to adopt the hateful coward mindset because misery likes company, and because validation is something a lot of people seek in order to enable their lifestyle as a hateful coward. If we all decided to be a hateful coward, the cannibalization process would have started a long time ago. But because of the resilience of those who are intelligent enough to understand that not everybody can do what you're doing, just because it's dangerous not only to yourselves, but to this society and to each other. If we didn't have people who are resilient enough to break that ideology down, to be glitches, to be people who act opposite to what the false way of living is, and live naturally like you're supposed to, by building, understanding, learning from mistakes, and having positive traits, while having the courage to do so likely alone, just because you're probably not going to have so many people do that, just because there are too many against, right? And that is that's kind of how fear comes into play too, and how that enables deeper senses of control, but we don't need to get into that right now. So the fact that some have opposed that is what creates the division. So that's basically what it's based on. You have a slew of hateful cowards, and then those who are intelligent enough to know that that's dangerous if 100% encompassing the population. So they choose away from this just because that's better, not only for themselves, but to maintain humanity itself. If you think about any species, any living species, whether animal, human, bird, fish, whatever, if they decided to cannibalize each other by hating each other or deciding that they're all prey of one another, eventually they would destroy themselves. This is why species don't do that. You don't see lions going against lions. You don't see tigers going against tigers. And these are people who are, or I shouldn't say people, but these are animals who need other species to live, right? But you don't see them going against each other because they inherently understand, even without a higher consciousness or the ability to feel like humans, they understand that they can't go against each other because they need real community in order to enable their sense of living. So yes, they do go against other species, but they don't go against themselves because that destroys their species. So that's how humans we're supposed to operate. We're omnivores, right? We're not carnivores. Our base needs don't require only meat. We can also eat plants, fruit, and meat is a bonus. But we can also find ways to just make that a normalcy too, which we have. So we have a variety of meats to eat from because we've placed ourselves as the dominant species on this planet just through community, because in the past, in order to get here, we've needed truth and we needed understanding and empathy of one another in order to enable that. But the problem comes in the form of when we're deciding to go against that natural way of living and instead decide to exploit one another for the need of ease and comfort, outside of knowing what's right and knowing what's most beneficial to people. And so this idea that the resilient to avoid the programming to become a hateful coward resist it is in itself a strength that proves it's better to do so anyway. And obviously it is. I mean, the way I've explained it can boil it down to preserving humanity. If you want to keep your species alive, you don't want to exploit them to the point of dehumanization or even death, right? Which is actually what's going on here. And I'll probably get on that in another video too. But the hateful coward is dangerous. And the programming for it is also dangerous. We essentially create human powder kegs in people who have this ideology of being a hateful coward, because they constantly need something to exploit or project onto in order to regulate their nervous systems, because they don't do this internally from within with positive traits. So the need to externally do this is not a foundational system, because you have to continually do this through other people. And of course, you need more people who oppose this, but there are just not enough of those people anymore, as a result of ease and comfort being sold to people before they can realize what that really means. And so now society's divisiveness has come to a point of irreconcilable decisions and differences, because there is no way to justify that people have lived in exploitative ways for so long by hiding awareness from those who see it. Thank God that those who see it are resilient enough to avoid becoming just like them, right? And you know what? Because of the aspect of the misery, and that there are people who will oppose you for not being like them, it likely can turn you into a hateful coward, even if you were somebody who understands the opposite. But if you didn't come to a higher intelligence enough to understand to be resilient despite the fact, right? And this also adds more numbers to that side of the spectrum, to that end of the division. So we realize that division is not safe for humanity through this. We also realize that it's better to try and be somebody who is positive and advocates for that by expressing themselves in natural ways so other people can subscribe to that subconsciously. So they don't feel like the best way to be is to oppose that, just because there are too many people that go against that. And it is better to be against opposition to human nature, just because it's easier. It's easier to be happy when you know how to be happy because you've decided to be that way. It's easier to be happy when you don't have to use somebody else to feel happy, when you don't have to go at the expense of somebody else to feel happy and to feel like you could be autonomous and internally regulating without needing somebody else. So this division is mostly attributed to wealth and racism. Like I've said at the beginning, those things are baked into this culture, and they are most beneficial for profit through capitalism. But you know what? Capitalism is really just a ruse. It's really just a way to justify that hateful living. If you think about it, knowledge is infinite, wealth is infinite, money is infinite, and resources, being recyclable, are infinite. So, because of this, there really is no need for profit. Because what do you need to profit? There is abundance of it all. You don't need a profit if it's fully stacked there waiting for you to use. So capitalism, I believe, is a ruse to have something to explain to why people want to exploit, or why they want to go against one another or be extractive or hateful of one another. It's an explanation to explain away the drive for that ease, right? And this is why laziness is seen as one of the deadly sins. If you're so lazy mentally that your ease is telling you not to internally regulate and instead go the easy route in hating other people externally because other people will do that, then you're telling yourself that you also want to slowly decompose humanity. And that's not seen directly. That's not known directly. It's the same with racism. You secretly want to decompose humanity by being a racist. You secretly want to cause separation and division by wanting wealth over somebody else in comparison, by wanting the inequality aspect when there is abundance of it for everybody. Wealth was used in the past to justify exchange of resources because there are less tools and less availability to do that easier. So it made those that were able to make the tools and the resources in nuanced ways more available to other people easier through money. But we're long past the need of money anymore. We don't need it. Sure, we can still use it just so that way we don't quickly run out of available resources before they're replenished, right? Because that is still an issue, right? We have an abundant an infinite supply of resources, but in order for them to be immediately available to you, they still need to be refurbished and brought down into their nuanced formats. So we still need, some form of autonomy to maintain that. But this doesn't mean that it needs to be withheld for comparison or hoarded for comparison. It doesn't need to hide away from the attention or the awareness of other people to know that. We don't need abundance to be seen as an option when it is a natural occurrence of living. You have an abundance of air to you. Nobody can take that away. Thank God it's not possible. If that was, I don't know what to say about humanity. I honestly don't. Thank God we have an abundance of water, abundance of oxygen, and resources as far as plants and agriculture. Thank God there are many different kinds of species around, so that way carnivores can still live, and that omnivores can also still attribute themselves to eating meat if they want to. Just so there's more to learn from that as well, right? The feedback. There are abundance of many things: sediments, minerals, knowledge. And these things are infinite in nature. But what I don't understand is, why did we need to hide it? Why did we need comparison? Why was the base format better to oppose this for so long too? Why did it have to be seen as the normal? I like asking why questions because it brings up feedback for more perspectives to have their agency put in to speak. So when you decide that these whys bring upon, your intuition to finally think on things that you've probably not thought of before, and then you use those opinions to have a back and forth with other people to decide what's the best way to live, or what's the best operation system to be normalized for humans. When this is enabled, then there is advocacy for growth and change, but not only for oneself, but for the collective. And so this tells me that there's probably some sort of sentiment against that we don't know, because it's baked into our programming. So that's kind of what I wanted to get on today, where the division comes from, and the mechanics as to how it's been baked into the system, as well as the likely reasons as to why it's been enabled for so long, and what the explanations for that were. So, like I've said, I believe capitalism is not necessarily anything that's really novel or extremely intelligent. It's just a living system that enables specific ideology. And that's really all there is to that. There's not much more to explain on that. It's more of something that we don't necessarily see as an issue just because of the normalcy. I'm sure in the future these realizations will come, just because that decomposing factor does lighten itself up at some point, right? If there are no more voices against that, eventually it does come to fruition, which we don't really want. It's kind of why we see these doomsday channels pop up, and why you might go on different social media apps like TikTok and see people talking about it. It's because there's a possibility, okay? Speaking to the possibility is probably the most we can do right now, outside of specifically having agency to fix. But when those things are fought against, there's an issue too as well. The idea that humans shouldn't try to understand one another, at least enough to have debate and to have opinions conflict, or at least coincide, so that way we come to agreement of some sort. At some point we have to realize that one way of thinking can be dangerous if we don't at least attempt different ways of advocating for what could be different. So it's better not to decide one way just because it's validated, or because there are another group of people who validate that immediately for you. And it's better to see the other side if possible, even if you don't necessarily want to immediately. So instead of the need to compare, or the need to exploit or extract, why don't we just try to understand one another in different ways, which is, part of the positive traits that come from naturally operating instead of opposing the self and other people by being a hateful coward, right? And I really don't want to make it look like Hateful Cowards or that lifestyle is glamorous or blissful or easy, because it's really not. I mean, it comes with a lot of work too. So, you know, the fact that the agency to make sure that it's maintained is there speaks to a deeper dysfunction, right? And it comes from addiction and the need to not control that. The US is kind of seen as the addiction enabler. You can have any kind of addiction here and it's not really an issue so long as it's not too detrimental to many people. But obviously there are ones that are insidious, that are detrimental to many people. But it takes a long time for those effects to really have highlights, right? So sadism and racism and whatnot, capitalism. But we enable the addictions. And then rehabilitation against that is also not administered correctly, because people who do advocate for honest rehabilitation have to oppose the hateful coward mindset or the opposition to normal living as a human. They have to be the ones to help you do that, or at least show you the way to rehabilitate, because that's how it's done. I mean, the people that have overcome their own addictions or their own false ideologies because they've been around people who have validated them for a long time, but finally seeing truth and understanding the power of that, are not necessarily around too much to be around for rehabilitation. So prison is not as useful as it has been in the past, as well as mental health centers and health centers and wellness centers in general are not as useful, just because there are not enough truthful people operating those things. Instead, those looking for exploitation outside of truth. And it's, you know, baked in because of other mechanisms. That's all I wanted to get on today. Hope you learned something. And see you guys in the next one.